Awkward Insurance. You people are so amazing. Thank you so much for being part of the Awkward Insurance Facebook group. We love having you there and for continuing to come back week after week to listen to us just say and do some really crazy stuff all the time.
Oh my gosh.
So our guest today is a really interesting one. I can't wait for you to introduce him. But first, Ashley, when we first met you, were you in the Single Ladies Club?
I was not in the Single Ladies Club. I was like 1 foot in the Single Ladies Club, but 1 foot out the door. Or, I mean, 1 foot on... Okay, let's restart that.
No, that was perfect. 1 foot out the door, and then we got her in. and then you pulled that foot in the door when he put a ring on it.
Yes.
you were engaged, and we had an episode that was engaged Ash. And then we had an episode with married Ash, and now we have why don't you tell everybody who you had the other foot out the door on?
Oh, God bless. You know, thank God he has a sense of humor. It is my honor and probably my wifely duty to introduce our guest today. And I would just like to preface this with both of my feet are now inside the door and we are married. So they're not going, proverbially. Proverbially.
Like middle of the room inside the door. We're not even close to the door.
Oh my goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, my husband, Stephen Bruder. Steve, thank you so much for being on here today with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you for still being married.
Yeah, almost a year.
Yeah, coming up on the 1-year anniversary.
So just like a weekish away. Do you have big plans for your anniversary, Steve?
We do. It's a surprise for Ashley.
That's awesome. Ash, tell us a little bit about your husband. What's he doing here?
I was going to say, for all of those listening, you're probably like, well, why do we have Ashley's husband on here outside of the fact that she's awesome, so he must be equally as awesome? Believe it or not, he is also in the insurance industry. So not only did I grow up in the insurance industry and around it, I now married somebody also in the insurance industry. Needless to say, our family dinners are incredibly exciting to us, but probably incredibly boring to everybody around us that's not in insurance. And they're probably like, what is wrong with these people? Before I tell you about what he does, I will say I have him trained very well now because now I get like pictures of random roofs when he's driving someplace. He's like, that roof needs to be updated. It's not architectural shingles. Or, hey, that's more than 2 steps. They need a handrail. And I'm so proud.
I just dropped my daughter off at a caregiver last week, and there were some branches going across their front walkway, and I walked up to the door and was like, hey, ding dong, hey, nice to meet you. You've got a trip and fall hazard out front. You might want to get that taken care of. And she was like, oh.
See, it just never shuts off.
I'm pretty sure there was a tractor in the Commons a couple weeks ago, and Ashley was calling out that attractive news. So I was a little bit worried she was going to get up there and play out on herself. So
okay, I wanted to, but I would have been safe about it, and they wouldn't have been held at fault because I chose to get onto it, and I was waiving my liability when I got on it. Anyway.
Oh my gosh.
So, Steve, let's go ahead and give everybody a little bit of a background. If you want, you can talk about, how you started out in the insurance industry when it wasn't really even insurance necessarily, and how you got to your love of insurance today.
Yeah. So I ended up starting in the insurance industry, I feel like pretty much how everybody does, for the exception of you, Ashley, it being a family business. I ended up joining kind of on a whim, and was not my plan whatsoever. So I was actually a licensed realtor and then bartending at a couple country clubs around here in Columbus, Ohio, and playing poker with a couple buddies. And my one friend who was at this insurtech company said, hey, do you want to not bartend and work all these long hours in hopes of a paycheck and in hopes of selling a house one day to eventually get that commission? Instead, you can have a 9-to-5, come work for me. I'll teach you everything you need to know about sales. And that was kind of the intro into me joining the insurance industry. So that company, we were selling software as a service, websites, SEO packages, social media to independent insurance agents. And believe it or not, I'm pretty sure I actually called on Ashley's family agency at one point.
Yep.
So,
is that how you met her, or Is that like a hindsight? We must have crossed paths at some point.
It was hindsight because I will tell you that when I took him home one time when we were driving through a town like 20 miles away from our agency, we're driving down the street and he's like, "Hey, I sold that guy a website." And he actually knew exactly who it was and I was cracking up. It was fantastic.
That's funny.
Yeah, very, very small world. But I was there for almost 3 years. I had a rock star sales team, fantastic vice president of sales in leadership who really made sure if I was going to dedicate my time for the insurance industry, I should know what insurance agents are doing on a daily basis. So I made it a point to learn as much about the industry as possible, reading up on PNC 360, Insurance Journal at the time, and I still carry a lot of those same morning routines into what I do this morning. So constantly paying attention to what's going on in the insurance and insurtech space and real estate space. But I was there for about 3 years. And then I ended up taking a jump and joining a local dental insurance company, Beam Dental, in, I believe it was May of 2019. When I joined there, I was a sales director and then ended up transitioning over to our partnerships team where I ran our national broker partners, our general agent strategy, PEO sales, health plan, and really learned everything there was to know about partnerships. Was doing that for about 3 years in total with that specific role and joined Foxen this past fall to run our channel partnerships. So I've been here just over 6 months now. Been an exciting ride, bit of a challenge, but being able to build a company from where Foxen was when I joined to where we're going in the future has been a very, very fun ride. It's a lot of the same muscle memory that I had over at Beam when I was over there for about 4 years.
So, like, what I love is living a little bit vicariously through you because I am very PNC oriented when it comes to companies and coverages. And, I did it for 10 years and I still feel like I live in it every day. But I live vicariously through you in that you go to these companies that have weird quirks of things that I never would have even understood fully. So like Beam Dental blew my mind when it's basically like a Fitbit for your teeth. They track your brushing habits and you can earn rewards and it can lower your rates, which is awesome. It's like Snapshot, I guess, but for your teeth.
Yeah.
And now you're at Foxen, which again, for everybody that's listening, Steve and I don't fight. The only time we fight, I don't even want to say fight, the only time we bicker or argue is over insurance because obviously I'm the Beyonce of insurance. I feel like I know everything, but I don't. So, Steve, explain to them what Foxen is because it is a really cool and important concept.
Before we move on, can I just acknowledge that he started out his conversation with the words licensed realtor, bartender, poker, and insurtech all in the same sentence? All right, let's go into Foxen. I'm dying.
All right, folks. Let's go back into this. Back to you, Steve.
Yeah, so a little bit about Foxen. I think to know about what Foxen does, I think it's important to know where Foxen was created from. So our CEO was actually in the multifamily real estate space himself. They had about 45,000 total student housing units that they managed. They both owned some of them and then third party managed some of them as well. And when they would have a resident move into their properties, they would collect their certificate of insurance that states you are required to have 100,000 in liability insurance to live here. They would file that policy away in hopes of not having a claim come in. And we see that a lot within the multifamily space where they're managing a lot of the renter's insurance compliance themselves. And to be frank, it's very time consuming. It's not what they do best because they don't specialize within the insurance space like we do. Their main roles are leasing up apartments, managing a community, and overall just making sure that the service requests that might be coming in are handled in a very timely manner. So renter's insurance compliance was not their specialty and it wasn't the top of their mind. Unfortunately, they ended up having a resident who put a box on top of an oven and it was a gas burner where they hit the burner, walked away. That box ended up catching on fire and causing just about $200,000 worth of damage. When they went to go collect on that policy was no longer in force. And they ended up having to pay out of pocket after a lot of back and forth with the insurance company as well as the capital investors, just about 200,000. I think just about that number to get that claim resolved. So at that point, our CEO went out to the market and was looking for a solution that would ensure 100% renter's insurance compliance. And there really weren't a lot of programs that were focused specifically on the owners and operators themselves. A lot of them would focus on the residents, which again is great, but nothing really solved the overall problem of 100% renter's insurance compliance. So he ended up creating Foxen out of that specific need. So what Foxen does, we are providing financial services and insurance services for owners and operators of multifamily properties. Kind of how the program works is, again, when a resident moves into the property, they turn in a third-party approved policy that is for $100,000 in liability. They put Foxen as the additional interested party, and then Foxen gets all those notifications of that policy. We do all the tracking and monitoring of those third-party policies. That way, if one does come up in danger of lapsing, let's say at the end of May, we're going to handle all of the outreach to say, hey, Ashley, your policy is no longer going to be enforced at the end of the month. Can you please update that payment or whatever the issue may be? And if they don't comply and make those changes that we need to make sure that policy stays in force, then they're going to be placed into the Foxen coverage, and that's for resident negligence. So it's really viewed as a master policy for the owner itself, and to make sure that that asset and that property is at 100% renter's insurance compliance at all times, whether it's a third-party policy with a fantastic independent agent or if it's with the coverage from Foxen. That asset owner will never have to worry about their property not being compliant for renter's insurance.
Yeah.
A lot of questions.
So it was a little long-winded there.
No, that was perfect.
That was great. You said placed into Foxen coverage for resident negligence. Is that the official term of we've put you in this because you're non-compliant? Is resident negligence? Okay. I was like, that's an interesting term. But then, so I guess this is like forced place coverage for mortgage companies. Like when a homeowner fails to keep their home insurance, then the mortgage company sends them all the notifications, asks them for insurance. If that doesn't happen, they get forced place coverage, which for the most part protects the mortgage company more than it protects the insured at a much higher rate. So the coverage that's with Foxen, is it mutually beneficial to both the property owner and the resident, or just beneficial to mostly beneficial to the property owner?
It's a great question. So typically, I'd say 9 out of 10 of our clients actually have a layer of protection for some of that personal content. So assuming that the coverage limits aren't used up, we do have a $10,000 in personal content that would be for the resident, as well as $1,000 in displacement costs. So let's say there was a kitchen fire, ended up causing $40,000 in total damage, and then caused $10,000 in smoke damage to their personal clothes. We would end up paying that claim out for $50,000.
Okay, so for those who are just kind of thinking here, like, how is liability coverage covering property damage? This is actually how coverage happens for renters. The renter's policy itself does not have building coverage for damage to the building, like, because the person who owns that policy, the renter, they don't own the building. So if damage occurs to the building because of something, then the liability coverage is where that's supposed to come from, which is why a lot of properties will require you to have renter's coverage with, like you said, Foxen requires $100,000. That's generally the minimum on homeowners policies in terms of the minimum coverage limit. I just disclaimer here, like $100,000 is not going to get you very far if you're living in a multi-unit location. But the other question I have, though, and I think I've had this question for a while, and I've never actually asked a mortgagee or somebody who's even, in insurance in terms of watching what those coverage limits are. Within the renter's policy, that there's actually an exclusion that says we're not going to pay property damage to property rented to, occupied, or used by or in the care of the insured, which is the person on the policy. And the exclusion, however, will not apply to property damage caused by fire, smoke, or explosion. So when you guys get your certificates of insurance, now that's ISO language. That's not every homeowner's policy out there, but they have similar exclusions like that say, we're not paying for damage to property rented to, which would be a rental and apartment, right? Except for when they're caused by this. I've been reviewing a carrier's language from somebody in New England, and theirs actually lists fire, explosion, smoke, and sonic boom because sonic boom's a huge issue over there, I guess. So that's another one. So each homeowner's policy may amend that exclusion a little bit to add, some of them will even add water damage and very specific types of water damage. But do you guys ask for a copy of the policy to see exactly how that exclusion reads, so you know exactly what's covered in terms of that exception that gives back coverage for the property damage?
In terms of what we actually collect and what we ask for from the residents and their policies, if I actually showed you the table that's right next door to me, it's stacked full of policies and policy details from all of the third-party policies we actually monitor and track the compliance for. So on a daily basis, we're getting in probably high hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of mail from the big insurance carriers about all the policies that are active, the ones that are going to be terminating soon, and all of that good stuff. So we're constantly tracking and monitoring what those policies look like and then uploading them into our system. And then our account management team is on a daily basis working out of our portal to call those people. Ashley, if your policy would be lapsing at the end of the month, you'd be getting a call from one of our client success members to make sure that you could get that policy back in good standing. And then if you did by the end of the month, you would not get the charge for the Foxen coverage. But if for some reason you didn't pick up your phone or you didn't see the email come through, you'd be placed into the Foxen coverage, again, to make sure that the property is covered at the end of the day. And then also making sure that you're not having an angry landlord calling you, wondering why at the end of the day you didn't have that active policy. So we're constantly tracking that. And Dustin, in terms of what the Foxen coverage does cover, again, it's for resident negligence, and our specific covered perils are water, fire, smoke, explosion, and sewage backup. That would be resident negligence or tenant caused.
So in terms of the cover, like I assume that just goes right into their rent. Is that how that works?
Correct. So
yeah.
So when you look at Foxen's ideal customer, we do have some requirements of properties that we work with. Total number of units that we'd like to see at a minimum is going to be 500 units. They also have to have a property management software that we can integrate with through an API connection. And that really is how the program works. So just like your rent and some of the other common fees that you're going to see with a property. So I think we actually at our townhouse, we've got the cable and internet that might be going through, the water and trash that's all paid through our rent. So if rent's $1,000, your water is $30, your trash is $15. Now we're at $1,045. You would add on the Foxen coverage to that, and then they would pay all of that at once.
Interesting.
So case in point, let me give you a real life example. So we signed the new lease to our townhouse literally around the block on March 8th. So we had an overlap of 2 places from March 8th to April 8th. Obviously, I wasn't going to get 2 renters insurance because there's coverage when you're moving, X amount percentage, et cetera, et cetera. So I did not update the address on my current renter's policy until that lease was up on April 8th, and their system immediately recognized that we didn't have it on the new place, and they force placed essentially, they don't have Foxen, but they force placed their Foxen version on us immediately, and immediately took $12 out of my account. So like their system is set up where it's just like it noticed it within 24 hours and said, bam, here's your fee. So they've got it together.
They don't have Foxen yet.
They will soon.
I'm currently working on that this week.
That's awesome. Like you move to a new place and you're like, hey, by the way, I'm a tenant and I have a better solution for you. So what do they currently use? Are they just like manually doing it, manually charging it? And Foxen's just that much better that it comes in with
Oh, ours isn't.
technology that helps them?
It's definitely not manual. Ours is a system. It's a
Yeah, it's a similar competitor that we won't name, but it's essentially a very similar program.
I like it. That's interesting. Before we move on, oh, I've got two. I'll just go with one of them. You mentioned something about 100% renters insurance compliance. So is that what Foxen has, is 100% renters insurance compliance, because it's either you have your own or you have Foxen, so that
That's it.
there's no deviation from that?
That's it. So when we work with a company, there's two pathways that we can work with a multifamily group. The first is going to be the easiest, where they currently require renters insurance and they have a limit of that 100,000 in liability, which almost every single lease I've personally signed throughout my lifetime has had that requirement. But we do run across some that don't require renters insurance. Some very large portfolios. You'd be shocked. I think I was just talking to one that had about 44,000 total units, and they did not require renters insurance, which from an insurance standpoint, that seems like a very big exposure, especially with them being student housing. That's neither here nor there. But let's go with the example of a group that does currently require renters insurance, and we'll keep with a nice round number of 1,000 total units. And let's say they wanted to go live with the Foxen program effective July 1st. So between now, which is May 8th, and July 1st, Foxen handles all of the outreach to the residents of that community, saying, your community has chosen Foxen for the renters insurance compliance program. Can you please update your certificate of insurance to have the additional interested party being Foxen? And then we give that address. That's the exact actual scenario that Ashley and I just went through about a month ago. And we get all of those policies between now and that start date. At the end of the day, people are human. They don't pay attention to emails. They won't pick up a phone call if they don't recognize the number. So we do give typically a small leeway for them to update that certificate. So when we launch our program, typically we're seeing about, on the low end, a 55% absorption rate, which means about 550 people are going to have the Foxen coverage. The remaining 450 are going to update that third-party policy and submit it to Foxen. Now, again, humans aren't perfect. They have policies lapse. They think they're pulling a fast one over their property management group, and they're going to cancel that policy a month after moving in. It's unfortunate. It is a really big reality, and it's one of the biggest pain points we run across is people not having that policy. And that's typically how conversations spark, because they recently had a claim where they thought they had coverage, but the resident canceled their policy. And that's what typically sparks these conversations. So in between now, again, in that July 1st, we'll typically see about a 55% absorption rate into the Foxen program. Now, that 100% compliance is coming from that 55 on Foxen and the 45 having an approved third-party policy to get us to that 100% renters insurance compliance.
Let me ask about that. You've said that twice now, an approved third-party policy. What makes it a non-approved? Like, you don't have to name carriers or anything, but what's the criteria there?
The easiest way to explain this is maybe their liability coverage in that policy is 50,000, but we need it to be at 100,000.
Okay. So not necessarily like the carrier, as in you've had a bad claims experience with that carrier, but the coverage requirement.
Coverage requirements could be an address. I guess the PO box number for Foxen.
Oh, a bad address?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Really simple things like that would be the reason why.
Interesting. So you mentioned that it has coverage for water, fire, smoke, explosion, and overflow when it results from negligence, which tells me that, that's the protection for the property owner. So what if the insured has this Foxen coverage because they let their policy lapse and now they've got Foxen coverage, but now there's wind damage, there's a tornado took out, that's obviously not a negligent thing. And it's not one of those water, fire, smoke, explosion, but they get that 10K in property contents. Does that cover, or is this policy just specific to these issues that are going to ensure coverage for the property itself? So it would need to be one of the water, fire, smoke, explosion, overflow for their property contents to be covered.
It would be that.
Just curious.
So it's truly different from an HO4 policy, and we make sure we go through all of the steps on our training and onboarding with the property staff when we do launch our program to really make sure that the residents know, as well as the property itself, that this is not an HO4 policy. This is just for resident negligence for those covered perils.
That's good information to know. Yeah, and I'm sure Ashley would kind of agree on, as we veer towards the independent agent side, making sure that your resident knows or your tenant knows if this happens. Yeah, you can rest easy a little bit that they're not going to come after you for the damage that you caused, but you might not be able to rest so easy for other issues.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was definitely my biggest concern when he was like explaining the product to me, because I love it for the building owners. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, Dustin, and Steve knows this too, because I talk about situations all the time. You could tell somebody what they have and the rules behind it and the exclusions as many times until you're blue in the face, and you can write it down and put it in front of them and have them sign it and initial it and do a backflip and put their blood on the paper and say, yes, I understand it. And then when the time comes for a claim, they don't understand it. So I mean, I feel like that's
Right.
like it's actually to the point where, now that I understand Foxen's product even more, I was saying to Steve, like, would it make sense for us to have our renter's insurance, but then I also pay for the additional waiver liability through our rental property, because that's an extra layer of protection for us then, and then we wouldn't have to go through our insurance before the other insurance on top of it. I don't want to say Foxen because it's not Foxen that we would have, but
I suppose that would be determined by what it says in the property or in the policy conditions about how other insurance or how the two insurances will work together. A lot of times there's we're excess if you've got primary.
right, exactly. I didn't know who would respond primary, but
Interesting. Oh, enough nerdy language though. That's fun. What excites you most about being at Foxen? You switched jobs for a reason. So what are you so excited about in terms of where you are right now, or maybe even where your career is heading?
Yeah, so I kind of
Look at that smile on his face. I love it. He's got a little smirk.
Yeah. It's so what I'm doing right now is what I love doing. It's building a company and not being 100% sure about what the next day is going to bring in terms of like a fun project that I could do. An insurance producer I'm going to speak with. A lot of the things that I did over at Beam are some of those same things I'm doing right now with Foxen. And I'd probably say the most exciting thing is the growth trajectory and being at a very high growth company and having really high milestones to hit as a company and then as my department too. Triple digit growth is not easy, but it's very fun. It's fast paced. It's what I love doing, and forming relationships with a lot of the insurance producers, a lot of them that I currently know, but then a lot of them that I don't know, a lot of the big brokerage houses that we work with, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, now that explains the very beginning of this conversation that included the word poker. You're a high stakes kind of guy.
oh my gosh.
Were there a lot of high stakes involved with marrying Ashley?
No.
Oh, wow. I thought maybe the speaker stopped working for a second because there was a pretty big pause there.
Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. I got to nerd out on insurance for just a little bit and learn about your high stakes career evolution with Foxen.
Yes, it's been so awesome.
Dustin, I gotta say, thank you again for having me. What's your favorite part of the insurance industry?
Oh, did he just flip the script?
I was just going to say the guest has now become the host. I don't know. Is that what you're saying?
Guessy?
Yeah, the guestie. Okay.
Oh my gosh, my favorite part of the insurance industry is the service. I have a heart for service no matter what anyways. Of course, I love the stakes of sales and everything else, but my heart is fully in service, whether that's providing service to a producer that I work with, providing service to a company that I work with, or an adjuster, that although that service looks more like arguing with adjusters. But more importantly, the clients. And that just kind of all wraps back around that when I'm providing adequate service to a producer or an agency or an agent, then they're providing good service to their clients. And so it just all comes around to service for me. I just have a heart for service. So
No, I mean that's fantastic. Ashley, you didn't. I'm not skipping you.
You're not off the hook.
Yeah, I'm coming for you next. Different question, but what excites you about the insurance industry?
Oh man. I mean, personally, it's just the constant changes that are happening in the insurance industry. Like, I love learning and I love trying to see how companies are going to adjust to all of the crazy things that are happening. I mean, one of the very first things my grandfather ever said to me when I was in the agency was, "You'll never know everything because as soon as you think you've learned it all, it's going to change." And I mean, case in point, who thought 15 years ago we'd be here discussing cannabis coverage on a homeowner's policy, or autonomous vehicles, things like that. So it's super interesting to see how these things, oh my gosh, how about sharing your pool on Swimply? Like, this is all stuff that we never thought we'd be talking about, and it's fascinating to me to just keep learning about how companies are going to adjust moving forward.
I agree. Thanks for those questions. That was kind of fun.
I know, that was good.
I want to maybe make it so that every guest has to ask us a question. Thank you so much for being here, Steve.
Thank you.
It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Toodles, everybody.
Bye.